is opposed, etc. Who knows? But we do know it's under tremendous pressure.
For example, save
on
50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. King's only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sailed because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just heard the minority leader, the senior senator from New York, Senator Schumer, on this floor talking about today's consumer price index data. And stunningly, he points to President Trump as the reason for it. Now, let me just correct the record, Mr. President. The price data that Senator Schumer is complaining about is from the final days of the Joe Biden administration. Those are the numbers that are out today. The final days of the Biden administration. And certainly everyone in Wyoming and everyone in your home state, Oklahoma, knows that under the Biden administration, the Democrats, prices, goods and groceries, gasoline, the things that we need in our everyday life, prices rose more than 20% under Joe Biden. High prices were Joe Biden's parting gift and his lasting legacy. They were the party of open borders and high prices. That's why they lost the election. So here we have the Senate minority leader, now in the minority, used to be in the majority. The reason he's in the minority is because of the high prices brought on the people of this country as a result of that administration. And the numbers out today are reflective of the final days of that administration. Painfully high prices. They came from Democrats' reckless overspending and their policies. And we're from energy states that was anti-American energy policies. Those are the things that Senate Democrats voted for repeatedly and stood behind, supported. Republicans are focused on making life more affordable for families all across the country, hardworking families. And we have a plan to unleash American energy. And that way, we can keep lowering prices for American families. I just can never forget when Joe Biden said he wanted to prioritize climate over energy that was available, affordable, and reliable. It was a disaster for the country and resulted in defeat of the Democrats. Today, Mr. President, I come to the floor also to talk about confirmation votes. And the Senate will soon vote on the confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. America needs to be healthy. I'm a doctor, worked with patients for over 20 years, a surgeon in Wyoming. The problem is our nation faces a chronic disease epidemic. Chronic disease, including diabetes, cancer, obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, chronic diseases. They are so widespread that managing them accounts for almost 90% of the federal health care spending in this country. And we spend a lot of our gross national product on health care. Nearly 3 in 5 Americans, adults, and 1 in 4 American children are impacted by this. Our health care system tries to address the problem, but yet by incentivizing procedures over prevention and paying for them, well, it often fails to address what we need to do effectively as well as economically. As a result, Americans are actually becoming less healthy. We need to put America on the path to good health. President Trump has selected Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to do just that, to make America healthy again. Mr. Kennedy will bring a fresh set of ideas and eyes to important debates surrounding our nation's public health. He's going to be a voice for the vast number of Americans who were failed by the previous administration. The previous administration silenced reasoned debate. I believe that Mr. Kennedy is going to deliver accountability and transparency. For Americans, that means more choices and better information. It means healthy foods and healthy competition for patients. It means lower costs and higher quality. It means increased access to care. Access is so critical in my home state of Wyoming, with so many rural and frontier communities, people long distances from healthcare. It also means honest, unbiased, and trustworthy scientific research that is both innovative as well as accountable to the American people. People want the truth. They want to know what the facts are. They want to make their decisions then for themselves. But this is Mr. Kennedy's bold vision to revitalize America's Bill of Health. He's very clear about his mission, has been throughout. The mission, as he told the Finance Committee, is to end the chronic disease epidemic and make America healthy again. Apparently, that's not enough for the Senate Democrats. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, she was actually dismissive of him at the Senate Finance Committee. I heard her say to Mr. Kennedy, "So that's the only reason why you're at HHS, to address this one issue? This one issue, chronic disease epidemic that is plaguing our nation, is the key issue to our health care. Respectfully, addressing chronic disease is what we ought to be talking about for health care for the people of our country." You know, Mr. Kennedy had to testify and did testify before two separate Senate committees as part of his confirmation. Most people being confirmed and coming to the Senate only testify at one committee. He responded to rigorous questions from both Republicans and Democrats, and he answered those questions with candor and with clarity. He told the Senate Help Committee that his leadership approach was collaborative. He pledged to empower the scientists to do their jobs, not to impose, as he said, preordained opinions on anybody at HHS. He was also clear that he supports vaccines. He told the Finance Committee, "I support the measles vaccine. I support the polio vaccine. I will do nothing as HHS Secretary," he said, "that makes it difficult or discourages people from taking those vaccines." The Senate has every reason to take him at his word. Mr. Kennedy is a bold choice. He is pro-health, pro-vaccine, and pro-transparency. He's the right choice to make America healthy again. I look forward to voting to confirm. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Mr. President,
Senator from Virginia.
I ask unanimous consent I be permitted to speak for 6 minutes, followed by Senator Wyden for 5 minutes, Waco for 5 minutes, and Senator Schumer for 2 minutes prior to the scheduled vote.
Objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise once more to oppose the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Security. As I've said repeatedly, I have great respect for Ms. Gabbard's over 20 years of service to our nation, both in and out of uniform. I am, however, profoundly worried that she lacks the qualifications or judgments to be TNI.
The job of the Director of National Intelligence is not a duty to be taken lightly. The incumbent serves as the principal intelligence advisor to the president and also bears the weight of responsibility to prevent another 9/11. The DNI must also represent tens of thousands of intelligence professionals who around the world often toil in anonymity. They serve as America's first line of defense against terrorists, transnational criminals, and adversarial nations who wish to do us harm. And she must also represent America to our allies as a trustworthy partner. Unfortunately, through her own words and actions, Ms. Gabbard has demonstrated she is not up to the task. She took the word of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against the assessments of our own Department of Defense, State Department, and intelligence community when she claimed that, and when she denied that Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. She knowingly met with a Syrian cleric who was vocally threatened to conduct serial bomb attacks against the United States. She sought to blame the United States and NATO, for Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. She publicly praised and defended Edward Snowden when he compromised our nation's most sensitive collection sources and methods, then ran off to hide in China and Russia. Those compromises put at risk not only our intelligence, but our men and women in uniform in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And just last week, even with repeated inquiries from her Republican colleagues, she refused to call Snowden a traitor. Now, speaking of China, when asked about TikTok at her confirmation hearing, she refused to acknowledge the threat posed by China owning a social media company that reaches 170 million Americans. And all the way up until she was nominated to be DNI, she publicly advocated for the wholesale elimination of FISA 702. 702 is a tool that we use actively in the intelligence domain, a tool that contributes literally 60% of the information that makes up the president's daily brief. That daily brief, which will also fall under her responsibility, should be confirmed. The environment facing the new DNI today is complicated and fraught with challenges. Not only had the traditional threats persisted, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, but we've seen an increased threats from terrorism, cyber actions, and transnational criminal organizations. All the while, the intelligence community is under attack. Some of our senior and experienced law enforcement and intelligence professionals are being asked to take political litmus tests. And those who are seen as infinitely loyal are being fired or forced to resign. Whole agencies are being eliminated and funding impounded in flagrant defiance of the Constitution, which only gives the Congress, us here in this body, the power to purse. And unvetted, unqualified individuals illegally burrowing into classified and sensitive information, this very action jeopardizing our national security and violating Americans' privacy. These Doge Bros seem to have no restriction on them at all, and I've seen no evidence that Ms. Gabbard is prepared to deal with this onslaught. Therefore, I must oppose her nomination and urge my colleagues to do the same.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a moment, the Senate will proceed to a cloture vote on the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I rise to encourage my colleagues to support this motion. As Secretary of HHS, Mr. Kennedy would oversee our nation's expansive healthcare system, from sources of coverage to advancement of public health. Mr. Kennedy's decades of experience and deep drive to advocate on behalf of consumers will set a patient-centered tone at the department. As he has demonstrated in both public and private settings, Mr. Kennedy is committed to reorienting our healthcare approach and restoring faith in our institutions. His passion for addressing America's chronic disease epidemic will save lives, reduce costs, and establish a foundation for a healthier, stronger country. His dedication to transparency will empower patients to make more informed decisions about their health care and form a responsive rapport with Congress. As Mr. Kennedy stated during his hearing, if Congress asks me for information, you will get it immediately. Over the course of his vetting process, Mr. Kennedy met with dozens of members on both sides of the aisle, spoke with bipartisan Senate Finance Committee staff, appeared before 2 committee hearings, and answered over 900 questions for the record, not to mention presenting thousands of pages of documents. Mr. Kennedy has gone through the same Office of Government Ethics process as all nominees who come before the Finance Committee and has received support for his efforts. Similar to all other nominees, we have a letter from the Director of the Office of Government Ethics stating, based thereon, we believe that this nominee is in compliance with applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest. He even amended his ethics agreement, going beyond what was required by the Office of Government Ethics in response to the request from one of our Finance Committee members. I urge my colleagues to join me in advancing this nomination so we can begin to make our country healthier. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President,
Democratic leader.
I know I spoke a little while ago on Tulsi Gabbard, but I feel so strongly I just wanted to make one last plea to my Republican colleagues. In a moment, the Senate will vote to confirm Tulsi Gabbard as the next Director of National Intelligence. Every single Democrat, I am really proud to say, will oppose this awful nomination. because we simply cannot, in good conscience, trust our most classified secrets to someone who echoes Russian propaganda and falls for conspiracy theories. It's hard to believe, of all the talented and capable people, that this is the person nominated. It's a person who has said things like the Ukraine invasion was caused by the United States, not by Putin. It's somebody who has denied Assad's use of chemical weapons despite all of the intelligence. It's someone who echoes Russian propaganda and falls for crazy conspiracy theories. I'd say to my Republican colleagues, please think once again about this nomination. This endangers our security. And my guess is, if a secret ballot were cast on Tulsi Gabbard, maybe she'd get 10 votes. You all know how bad she is. And so I know that people feel they want to please the president in his nomination. But there are certain times you have to buck and stand up and say, no, this is just a very bad choice for America. The nomination of Ms. Gabbard is simply one of those. I plead with my colleagues. I know it's the last minute, to think twice, to vote no, as we all will vote, because this is such an awful nomination who will endanger our national security and our intelligence operations throughout the country and the world. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks,
President. Senator from Oregon.
I rise to oppose the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary.
Senate quorum call.
Vacate the quorum call.
Without objection.
President, I rise today to oppose the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. And let me put it very bluntly to my colleagues. A vote for Robert Kennedy for this position is a vote for a sicker America. And there's irony in that judgment, considering Mr. Kennedy is the figurehead of a mass movement known as Make America Healthy Again. But on issue after issue, Mr. Kennedy refused to stand up for policies that will keep Americans healthy and out of the hospital. From vaccines to affordable health insurance to lower drug prices to women's reproductive health care, Mr. Kennedy, through several hearings, ducked and dodged and weaved instead of answering the basic questions that came from senators of both parties. When he did answer, he demonstrated a shocking lack of knowledge about the federal health programs that he charged with running and a willful desire to mislead senators about his views on science matters like vaccine safety. The only conclusion I'm left with is that he stands steadfastly by the outlandish views he's expressed over his 2-decade career as an anti-vaccine crusader, and he's fully prepared to implement the Republican health care agenda. That agenda boils down to putting big pharma and insurance companies back in charge while leaving millions of American families to fend for themselves without affordable care. And I want to be clear about this. As director of the Gray Panthers, which is what I did before I went into public service, I can just tell you, Mr. President, this is the least qualified nominee to ever be nominated for a position of this importance. But for the next day and night, Senate Democrats are going to be out on this floor telling the American people why. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle still have an opportunity to turn away from a dangerous path. If they do not, my view is their legacy will be tarnished by setbacks in science that will echo in America for decades. As I mentioned, I've spent countless hours in man working with seniors to navigate the newly created Medicare program and help them avoid predatory tactics that remain all too common today. To me and many other Americans, healthcare colleagues is the important issue, because if you and your loved ones don't have their health, everything else goes by the board. And the reality is, we need to make sure that Americans have the best and most affordable health care possible, rather than having a handful of healthcare companies being gobbled up in the entire market for health insurance, pharmaceuticals, hospitals, and even doctors. The results have been great for shareholder profits and disastrous for American families. Costs keep climbing. The act of getting a doctor's appointment or filing an insurance claim seems to have become an Olympic sport in much of America. The system delays and denies care, rakes in profits, while patients are left wondering how they're going to get the care they need. So the question before the Senate now is whether we want America's chief health officer to be somebody who's going to take on those corporate interests, somebody who's going to fight tooth and nail to lower costs and improve care, somebody who's going to work to protect and improve the federal health care programs that tens of millions of Americans rely on them, and not gut. Everything I've seen and heard from Mr. Kennedy over these last few weeks has led me, colleagues, to conclude he is not the person that America needs. Americans have little reason to take Mr. Kennedy at his word. They do, however, have every reason to believe Mr. Kennedy will continue to embrace and amplify anti-vaccine programs. Every reason to believe is he will back up Donald Trump's abortion bans, and every reason exists to examine the prospect that he'll be a rubber stamp for the Republican health agenda that would rip away the health care of so many Americans. Over the next 24 hours, Democrats are going to show the American people why these concerns are so serious. I yield the floor, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this nomination.
All time has expired. The question occurs on the Gabbard nomination. There is sufficient second. There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Also Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso. Bennett. Blackburn. Blumenthal. Hunt Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Brett.
Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Gaines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hogan, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Thomas, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Modi, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Rish, Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Britt, Budd, Cassidy, Cotton, Crapo, Curtis, Daines, Grassley, Johnson, Justice, Langford, Moran, Mullen, Risch, Rounds, Schmidt, Scott of South Carolina, Sheehy, Tillis, Tuberville. Mr. Hoven, aye. Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Coons, Hassan, Heinrich, Kim, Klobuchar, Lujan, Murray, Peters, Schumer, Shaheen, Van Hollen, Wyden. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mrs. Hyde Smith, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Gallego, no. and I. Miss Duckworth, Miss Duckworth, no. Miss Ernst, aye. Miss Collins, aye. Miss Rono, no. Mr. Merkley, no. Miss Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Welch, no. Miss Baldwin, no. Miss Cantwell, no. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Graham, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Warner, no. Miss Lummis, aye. Mont Rochester. Mont Rochester, no. Mr. Husted. Mr. Husted, aye. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. King. Mr. King, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Fetterman, Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Moreno, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Booker, no. King, Mr. King, no. Miss Rosen, Miss Rosen, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Miss Smith, no.
I can't wait until McConnell's done.
Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Padilla, no. Mr. Young, aye. Ms. Murkowski, Aye. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, no.
We good, huh? We good. 51 yays.
Mr. Hawley, Mr. Hawley, aye.
Yeas are 52, nays are 48. Nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered, made, and laid upon the table, and the president will immediately notify of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader,
I move to waive the mandatory.
is there objection? Without objection. The clerk will report the motion for closure.
All right, there we have it. There we have it, folks. We are confirmed 52 to 48. And that is great. They are going to be talking now about Health and Human Services Secretary. That will be good news. That will be good news. They'll get that one on the go. Let's pray that Kennedy gets RFK Jr. gets confirmed on that. We will be live at another show here in a little while. So thank you guys for tuning in. We got some audio issues I'm working on, and I'm trying to get them fixed out. I can't figure out where this thing is picking up audio, but it's not coming out of this. So we'll be working on that, guys. I want to say thank you all for tuning in, and don't forget to check out our show here in a little while. God bless.